As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
The reason I wrote Supercommunicators is because there are a set of skills that make us into better communicators. And during those moments when you do want to connect with someone, when you do want to have a real conversation, it's helpful to have those skills available to you. And so within psychology, the matching principle says that successful communication requires having the same kind of conversation at the same moment. And we can start like matching each other on emotional. I can match you, I can invite you to match me, and then we can go to practical, and then we can go to social, and then back to emotional, and then to practical again. As long as we're moving through those different kinds of conversations together, we not only hear each other better, we feel connected to each other.
That was Charles Duhigg on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
I'm Yael Schoenbrunn, a clinical psychologist, faculty at Brown University, author of Work, Parent Thrive, and a biweekly newsletter on relationships.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, the Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hello, this is Debbie, and I have a very exciting episode for you today. We were so fortunate to get Charles Duhigg on the podcast. He's the author of several terrific books. He's a great writer. And we're here to talk about his newest book, which is called Supercommunicators, which of course is a book about getting better at skills related to conversations and communication and deepening relationships, which of course is an incredibly important skill and one that we can all get better at. And he offers some really practical and important advice for how to do that. And we were so lucky to have him on. He's a very busy person. And unfortunately, we had to kind of have a shorter conversation. And so because the interview itself is a bit shorter, it's about 30 minutes long or so, I was lucky that I have 2 other conversation experts right here on the podcast, my 2 co-hosts, Michael and Yael. They're here to introduce the episode with me and also going to kind of supplement the episode with a couple of other skills because truly they both are experts. So I think, as you know, Michael is a coach who works a lot on conversations with people and actually practice this with his clients. And I've learned a ton from you, Michael, on how to be a better communicator. And you've given us tips on the podcast before. And Yael, of course, is a couples therapist who has a ton of expertise in working on this with her couples clients. And so let's dive in. Michael, I'm going to ask you to give us a few of your ideas that will build on what Charles talks about in the episode and also offer something new. So Michael, kick us off.
So I have to say that a lot of the stuff he talks about in his book is material that I've been teaching for a while, but I was blown away by the science and the research that he put into it. Because for me, when I train small talk, vulnerability, sharing, asking better questions, all of that stuff, this is born out of personal experience and working with groups and seeing this in action. And Charles was adding all of the research to it in a really appreciated the academic level that came to that. There's one piece, and we were talking before we started recording, we were talking about things that Yael and I and you, Debbie, could potentially add to the conversation. And there's one piece I feel somewhat obliged to add to it. It's a side effect of becoming a good communicator. And I'm not saying like this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. This is just something people need to expect as they get good at this. And that is that people will be drawn to you and you will do a lot of talking, which is a good thing. Like really, this is a good thing. You're connecting with people, right? But you can also expect that you spend, for example, more time in the coffee kitchen at work because people now suddenly want to talk with you and they engage with you. Or you go to a social event and you spend a lot of time talking with people that may be talking to you because you're easy to talk with. They see Debbie and they're like, oh, I'm going to talk to Debbie because Debbie is so easy to talk to and I don't feel awkward around her. And the end result is that poor Debbie is talking to that person for 2 hours because she's easy to talk to. So I guess what I'm saying is as you develop your communication skills, your social skills, you also need to develop a technique to gracefully exit, or the confidence, I should rather say, the confidence to gracefully exit when you realize that you need to get back to work. Or there are more people that you want to talk to, that there are other conversations you want to start with other people, and to be a little bit able to step outside of your comfort zone and make a hopefully graceful exit. But keep an eye on that.
Wait, Michael, can you maybe give us a sample script for what that might sound like? A graceful exit kind of script?
Oh,
Use the party example, because that happens to me all the time. You're kind of like, oh, I want to go talk to somebody else, but how do I end this? I mean, what might you say?
So I was dreading that someone might actually ask this because this is the crux of being a communications coach. People will ask you, Michael, tell me exactly what to say when the situation comes up, which sounds reasonable, but I'm going to turn you into another Michael. Like I can tell you what Michael would say in these situations, but I don't know what a Yael would say in that situation, what Debbie would say in that situation, because this is very personal. I'll give you my favorite example. I once had a client ask me, Michael, if someone compliments you on your eyes, what do you say? It's like, dude, I don't know. Like if someone compliments me on my eyes, I'm like, hey, do you want to touch them? But if someone compliments someone, like, I don't know. Like, this is Michael. This is Michael saying stupid things because that's what Michael says. So whatever you use to make that graceful exit, whether it is direct, whether it's somewhat apologetic, whether it is a little bit extracting yourself from the conversation, like slowly walking backwards, like Homer Simpson through a hedge. The important thing is that it's values aligned with the person that you want to be. For me, it often is direct, respectfully direct. Why? Because it's important for me to train people in their confidence, and I want to be that the role model that kind of like leads with that. Other people find it much, much better to just become quiet and hope that the other person picks up on it. What you shouldn't be doing is using a lie, like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom, or, oh, I need to whatever, because then people be like, oh yeah, actually I need to go to the bathroom as well. And now you're stuck, or they see you wandering off and do something else, right? You shouldn't lie to people, but you should find your own values-based approach to handling situations like that. And then it's a different beast at work altogether, because at work, you might need to be more diplomatic when someone engages you in a conversation and not be like, hey, actually, we've been talking for way too long. I need to get back to my desk, when, you're talking with someone who might have some say on your next promotion.
Well, I did used to have a coworker who was so good at that. She was a role model to me. I'd be in there chatting with her and she'd be like, it was nice talking to you, but I have to go finish my work now. Or like, I have a limited amount of time to get this work done. And I was like, oh, yes, sorry. I was never offended by it. I actually took it as like, I should be doing that because I will get easily distracted at work. So
it was the direct, confident approach to cutting this off. Yeah.
And it does take people aback a little bit, I think, sometimes when you're that direct. But I actually think in some ways it's kind of nice. It's like, okay, I don't have time to chat right now. See you later,
Exactly, because you show the other person that they're not a burden on you, because the moment they might become one, you will let them know, and you go back to work.
Yeah.
And that's liberating for both parties.
Yeah, and it's like, oh yeah, I should probably get back to work too. I kind of forgot what I'm here for. No.
Exactly. And I don't have to worry about talking with Debbie too much, because I know Debbie will cut me off when I'm becoming a little bit of a nuisance, right?
Well, Debbie probably won't, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, so Elle, I want to hear some of the couples therapists' ideas that you utilize and find helpful.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share this tip with our podcast audience because it's one that the couples that I see in the therapy room say is the most useful takeaway from couples therapy. And incidentally, I wrote about this for the Washington Post last year and got to interview Charles Duhigg about this idea. So we can link to that in the show notes. That was a really fun interview to do for my own writing. His book does a really nice job of setting up this idea, and it's a similar idea to something that cognitive behavioral couples therapy teaches, which is that there's different types of conversations. And one of the problems in miscommunication or in communication hiccups is that we're having different types of conversations, even if we're talking about the same thing. Now, the model that Charles Duhigg has in his book, Supercommunicators, is that there's 3 conversation types. But in cognitive behavioral couples therapy, we actually just talk about 2 different conversation types. Simpler. But I think Charles' model is actually terrific too. So I encourage people to check that one out. But in the therapy room, what I teach couples is that if you sort of boiled all communication down to 2 types, we can have one kind of conversation that's about understanding. When I'm trying to share something and I want to be understood, or I want to kind of understand myself as I'm talking and have somebody kind of along for the ride with me, that's an understanding conversation. The second kind of conversation is a problem-solving conversation. That one's a little bit more obvious to most people, where the goal of the conversation is to solve a problem or make a decision, either to have somebody help you make your own decision, or when it comes to couples therapy, it's often like people are trying to negotiate how to make a decision together about something that impacts them both. And the reason that it's helpful to distinguish between those 2 kinds of conversations is that if I, for example, come home from work and I'm telling my partner, oh, I had a really rough day and I felt really incompetent and I'm just feeling kind of insecure about myself. And what I'm really seeking is to feel understood and connected with in the emotionality of what I'm experiencing. But he detects my partner is in distress. I need to help her. And he offers me suggestions. Oh, why don't you go get some more training? Or, you have a friend who does much better. Maybe you can talk to that friend. If I'm seeking validation and understanding and he's solving, I'm going to feel invalidated, right? Because I'm going to feel like he's telling me I'm the problem when I really just want him to say, oh, you poor thing. Everybody has that kind of a day. You're great. Talk to me. I want to hear exactly what's going on. And so if I get angry with him, oh, you're being invalidating. You're telling me I'm the problem. Then he's going to feel like, hey, wait, I came in with all good intentions. I saw you were in distress. I wanted to help. I offered some thoughtful advice. And here you are attacking me. So now he's going to feel undermined and criticized. And so 2 people that entered into a conversation, ostensibly talking about the same topic and trying hard to meet one another, are both going to feel criticized, invalidated, and totally disconnected. And so having this idea of there are 2 different conversation types, and are we on the same page in terms of our communication objectives can help people align more quickly. The second issue that I talk to couples a lot, and people who are, really successful in their jobs tend to be very good problem solvers. People who are very good parents also tend to be good problem solvers. One issue that comes up a lot for couples is that they problem solve too quickly. And the reason that they do that is because they're pretty competent problem solvers. But the problem is, for a lot of issues in relationships and in social life in general, problems are really complicated. They have multiple layers. They have complicated histories. We, as 2 individuals, have different agendas, priorities. We might identify different parts of the bigger problem that we're solving for. And so if we jump into problem solving too quickly without first understanding what's important to the other person, how they feel about it, what they want to do with it, what the history is, what the most important parts that are coming up, if we can't sort of get on the same page about what part of the problem we're talking about, then again, ostensibly we're talking about the same thing, or we're even problem solving together, but we're solving for different parts, or we're not appreciating where each person is coming from.
And so one of the things that I really counsel people on is that even if you're both on the same page of we need to do some problem solving around this, to actually, when you have a moment, as much as you can, to first do understanding together to make sure that you're on the same page about how you're going to solve the problem or what part of the problem you're going to solve. So the tip is to clarify for yourself and to clarify with the other person, what kind of conversation are we having? What kind of conversation do each of us want to have? And can we negotiate it if we want to have different kinds of conversations to do some turn taking? And the second piece is, if we both agree that we want to do problem solving, can we first just briefly do an understanding conversation to make sure that we're going to problem solve together in an aligned way? And so this is a very basic kind of idea, but it actually really can change the course of a conversation. So for example, if you're having a conversation and you sort of realize something's not kind of lining up here, and you just pause and say, wait, hang on. What kind of a conversation are each of us having? Or are we solving the same part of the same problem? Then you can course correct even in the middle of a conversation. Or if you're clear that you want to have an understanding conversation and you know my partner always wants to problem solve, you can say, hey, just so you know, I really just want to vent and I really just want you to hear me and try to understand where I'm coming from. I really don't want to do problem solving. Then you can sort of head off the kind of communication error that might be common for you. So this is a tip that couples really find useful. And often people will tell me, I use it at home with my kids, with my partner. It's also really useful at work and with my friends. So it's one of these very basic things that can really change how successful we are in communicating with people.
I think it's great with kids because often I'll try to help them navigate something. But if I ask them, do you want me to help you with this? They'll say no, and it's funny because like even at a young age, they have a pretty good sense of that. And I do think part of this conversation and the book Supercommunicators that's really helpful is it's a subtle thing, but making that really explicit and helping people understand like, okay, exactly what's happening in this conversation. That's very helpful.
How do you introduce that question when and if it's necessary? So I often get friends on the phone or I get a voice message, and the first thing I want to send back is, hey, do you need me to listen here or do you need some advice? Which I almost feel like having a little like red button on my desk that automatically plays that. And it's like a weird, no, it's not a weird, because I know it's useful, but at the same time, it feels very mechanistic, very repetitive. I almost wish that I could intuit it a little bit more.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to maybe what you were saying earlier, where it doesn't always work to have a script because it can feel artificial or not in keeping with your own values or kind of how you want to show up. So I do think you can sometimes feel it out. The reason that I find it so useful is when you feel like things are going off the rails or you have had the experience where you often don't line up with somebody, it is a mechanistic way to kind of correct. But I don't think it's something that you have to do all the time. Probably a lot of listeners have heard of this, cute little saying that you can ask somebody like a child or a friend, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? And so there's sweet, sort of lighthearted ways to do it. But Michael, to your point, I think if you have a friend, it is clear that they're upset. Most of the time when people are upset, they don't straight off the bat want advice. They want to be understood. So that's just something to know for most people. And even if you're somebody who really, really loves to problem solve, if you're hurting, you often probably want that too. So it's often a safe bet to start with understanding. And then if you feel this question of, could it be useful to talk through what you want to do here? I think that's something to ask of, would you want to sort of talk about where you're going to go from here? Or do you want to just kind of stay in this space? I think there's ways to do it that don't feel so mechanical or scripted. But I do also think probably a lot of the time we can intuit it, especially if you sort of have a vibe with somebody where you tend to fall into one kind of conversation or another.
That's where this framework can be helpful. A lot of times I think you can intuitively pick up on what they need, and just realizing that like, oh, I have this tendency to jump into problem solving mode immediately. Let me hold back. I think that I've advised individual clients to do that sometimes when they have this issue, because I think people start to know themselves and know like, oh, I get really uncomfortable and I want to problem solve immediately, but I know that usually doesn't land. There's a time and a place for it, but you can kind of tell when someone is just wanting to vent. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, these tips are really helpful. They're very much in line with the conversation with Charles Duhigg, but also, some more helpful food for thought. So thank you both. It's great to have two experts handy right here on the podcast. And Michael, I believe you have an exciting announcement related to Supercommunicators for us.
Well, I'll leave it to the listener to decide whether it's exciting, but it's exciting for me. And from her reaction, I also know that it was exciting for Yael. Supercommunicators is going to be the next book for our Psychologist Off the Clock book club, most likely in March, and most likely again with a 2-session book club. So we have more time to discuss each chapter. So if you are already part of the book club, you'll get notifications. And if you're not, email us at offtheclockpsych@gmail.com with book club as a subject, and we'll add you to it.
It's exciting. If you haven't been to the book club yet, it's a lot of fun. And I think this is a terrific book to have for a book club conversation. It can help people dive in deeper to these skills.
It's like getting an opportunity to get some free communication coaching from the guy who everybody flocks to at the parties.
Well, without further ado, we hope you enjoyed this conversation with Charles Duhigg. Charles Duhigg is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and the author of The Power of Habit, which spent over 3 years on New York Times bestseller list. It's a book I love. His second book, Smarter, Faster, Better, and his latest book, Supercommunicators, were also bestsellers. A graduate of Yale University and Harvard Business School, Charles has been a frequent contributor to This American Life, NPR, The Colbert Report, PBS's NewsHour, and Frontline. He currently writes for The New Yorker magazine and lives in Santa Cruz with his wife and 2 children. I'm so happy to have you on, Charles. Thanks for
having me on.
Big fan of your books. And we're really going to focus the conversation today on your latest book, Supercommunicators, How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. And in the book, you write about how you wrote it because you yourself wanted to get better at communication skills. And you had noticed these people out in the world who you describe as super communicators. They're really skilled at this. How would you describe super communicators? What are they doing that is so special?
Yeah, well, it's probably easiest to illustrate it. So if you're having a bad day and you came home, after work, and you wanted to call someone who would just make you feel better, just talking to them would like lift your spirits. Do you know who you would call? Does that person come to mind?
There's a couple, probably 3 people that.
Okay, so who's one of them? Who's one of them?
Well, one would be a close friend and colleague of mine.
Yeah. So that friend and colleague, that person is a super communicator for you.
Okay.
And you're probably a super communicator for them. When you talk to them, they know what questions to ask you in order to sort of get at what's really going on. They know how to show you that they're listening to you by proving that they're thinking about it. They're not sort of distracted. They're doing a series of things, a series of skills that they might not even think of as skills that make them good communicators with you. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that we are all super communicators at one time or another during our days or our weeks, right? There are some people that we're automatically super communicators with because we're so practiced at it. But we don't often recognize the skills that we're using with those people. And consistent super communicators, people who can do this with nearly anyone, who can connect with basically anyone they want to, they're people who have simply realized those skills that you use with your friend, I can use those with strangers. I can use them with anyone. And once you realize that this skill is fungible, right, that it's something you can use in nearly any setting, suddenly it opens up all kinds of avenues to connecting with people.
Can you tell me, so something I've noticed, and actually you mentioned this a little bit in your book, it's a tough question coming your way, but in a social gathering, even with people, maybe I don't know anyone really, really well there might be certain people I just sort of instantly jive with, right? Like we click. I feel compelled to go stand next to them at the kid's birthday party or something. Like, why do certain people connect with certain other people just more naturally? Is there an answer to that question?
Well, people don't connect with other people more naturally. There's biases within your mind that are pushing you towards assuming that you're going to like some people more than others, right? And usually it's because they have something in common with you. They might look like you. They might be from the same neighborhood. They might be a woman versus a man. They might have kids. It's that just like you have kids, they might be attractive, right? It's not as if there's some thing within you that corresponds to something within another person that you can't figure out, that you only know by glancing each other Rather,
Mhm.
we tend to make it snap decisions based on in-groups and out-groups. And oftentimes when we see someone and we think that we want to go spend time with them, they look interesting to us. It's because they're signaling something that appeals to our in-group.
And then what about a little bit past that? Like, what might help a relationship sort of develop beyond this instant attraction into like, oh, maybe we'll go get coffee sometime? Is there some magical ingredient to that, do you think?
So let me be clear, none of it is magic. There's no magic whatsoever, okay? It's a series of skills that anyone can learn, and that communication is based on skills. No one's born being a great communicator. These are skills that we have to learn to use. But yes, what we know, and in fact, there's a sort of famous experiment in psychology known as the fast friends procedure, where these two researchers, Arthur and Elaine Aron, at SUNY, Stony Brook, they would bring people into rooms, two by two, just bring them in, a pair of people who were strangers. And their goal was to see if they could figure out how to make strangers into friends. And they tried all kinds of things at first. They tried having people just tell stories to each other, or having them do puzzles together, or go on walks together, or sing songs together, or talk about the things they have in common. And none of that really seemed to work. Some people became friends, some people didn't. And then they came up with a new approach. And their approach was that they said, okay, look, what we're going to do is we're going to hand you 36 questions. And what we want you to do is each person ask the other person the question and then hand the list back. So go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, question 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what they found is that afterwards, it only took about 45 minutes to go through all 45 questions. And then everyone would go home, right? They just assumed the experiment was over. But the experiment was actually just beginning. Because 7 weeks later, the Arons would contact the people who had been in those rooms, and they would ask them a series of questions, including, have you been in touch with that person you did this project with? And again, keep in mind, these people were all strangers. They didn't exchange information. But people would say things like, yeah, I knew his name was John R. So I started going through like directories, calling every single John R. until I found the guy that I had done that thing with. Or I would walk all over, because this was at a college campus, I'd walk all over campus on Saturday nights just looking for this guy. And then I finally found him. One guy actually said that he had a beer with the woman that he had done the project with. And then they saw a movie a week later. And when they got married a year after that, they invited everyone in the lab to come to the wedding. And so the Arons were trying to figure out, what was it about these conversations that made them so powerful, that made people turn into friends? Because about 70% of people would seek out the other person and spend time with them after the experiment. And what they discovered is it's what's known as reciprocal vulnerability or reciprocal authenticity. Because someone else did a similar experiment where he took this exact same 36 questions. What he would do is he would tell each person, okay, answer all 36 in a row, then hand the list to the other person, and they answer all 36 in a row. And that didn't work at all. People said that they were bored, that they didn't like each other, that it was awkward. There's something about the back and forth, the reciprocation, particularly reciprocation of authenticity. When I say something real and you respond by showing me that you've heard me, but saying something real yourself, that's when suddenly we feel connected to each other.
That's so fascinating. And I can see how that skill of reciprocal, kind of just that back and forth of vulnerability, you share, I share, that does bond us and connect us to people and help us feel comfortable. And with some people, that just doesn't quite happen. And so that's maybe part of what's going on there, because I can think of people where either they don't share anything about themselves, or they don't ask me a single question about or they seem like they're not listening to me or something. It's kind of like, okay, bye. I don't really feel a strong desire to keep seeking you out,
Right. Yeah. In general, I'd say that those people are they're not super communicators. They're not using those skills to connect with us. And to be honest, that's fine. Sometimes people just don't want to talk to us. Like sometimes we get in the Uber and we don't want to have a conversation with a driver. We just want to check our phone, and that's okay. But I think the reason I wrote Supercommunicators is because there are a set of skills that make us into better communicators. And during those moments when you do want to connect with someone, when you do want to have a real conversation, it's helpful to have those skills available to you.
Tell us a little bit about, you call it the matching principle, which I think is related to what you're talking about here when people get into that kind of alignment or that they feel that connection. So what is the matching principle?
So this book started because I sort of fell into this bad pattern with my wife where I would come home from work and I'd start complaining about my day, and my boss doesn't appreciate me and my coworkers don't realize what a genius I am. And my wife would offer this very good advice. She would say something like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and get to know each other a little bit better? And instead of being able to hear what she was saying, I would get even more upset. And I would say, why aren't you supporting me? Why aren't you on my side? You're supposed to be supposed to be telling me how right I am. I would bring a problem to her and she would solve it. And I wasn't looking for a solution. And I think this happens in a lot of relationships. And this is how I discovered the matching principle is I went to researchers and I asked them, what's going on there? Because, as a journalist, I'm supposed to be a pretty good communicator, but this pattern was happening again and again and again. And they said, well, it's interesting that you've stopped by because we're actually living through this golden age of understanding communication because of advances in neural imaging and in data collection. We understand what's happening inside people's brains when they're having conversations for really the first time. And one of the things that we've noticed is that when we have a discussion, we tend to assume that that discussion is about one thing, right? We're talking about my day at work or where to go on vacation, or we're talking about the budget in a meeting. But actually, they said, if you look at people's brains, during that one discussion, they're having multiple kinds of conversations. And in general, these conversations, they tend to fall into one of three buckets. There's these practical conversations where we're solving problems together or we're making plans. And then there's also emotional conversations where I tell you what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize, and I want you to relate. And then there's finally social conversations, which is about how we relate to each other, how we relate to society, the identities that are important to us. And they said one of the things we've noticed is that if two people are having different kinds of conversations at the same time, it's really hard for them to hear each other. It's really hard for them to feel connected. They're both equally legitimate conversations. That's what was happening with me and my wife. I was having an emotional conversation. She was having a practical conversation. They're both equally legitimate. But because we weren't having the same kind of conversation at the same moment, it was really hard for us to hear each other. And from this, what came out is the matching principle. They said, look, we've also noticed that when people do have the same kind of conversation, even if they don't agree with each other, even if they don't particularly like each other, they feel connected afterwards. They really hear what the other person is saying. And so within psychology, the matching principle says that successful communication requires having the same kind of conversation at the same moment. And we can start matching each other on emotional. I can match you. I can invite you to match me. And then we can go to practical, and then we can go to social, and then back to emotional, and then to practical again. As long as we're moving through those different kinds of conversations together, we not only hear each other better, we feel connected to each other.
Approaching the conversation from a similar place and just kind of expectations. Yeah, that's helpful to kind of think explicitly about that, because I think a lot of times we may or may not be doing that, but to have a little bit more awareness of that, I think is helpful to kind of ask yourself that question like you did with your wife.
Right. Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's Jill here, and I am super excited to announce that I will be speaking at one of the largest and truly most inspiring and meaningful psychotherapy conferences we have here in the US, the Psychotherapy Networker Conference. Other speakers include Esther Perel, John Kabat-Zinn, Ramani Durvasula, David Kessler, and so many more. I am just thrilled and honored to be among this esteemed faculty. The conference is being held March 20th to the 23rd in Washington, D.C., and if you register now, you can get early bird rates and save up to 40%. Plus, you can get an additional $50 off when you use the code SYM50. That's SYM50. So go to our website, offtheclockpsych.com, and click on our books and offers page and register today.
So I just want to really quickly dive into the why around this that's a little bit deeper than you were talking about before. And you mentioned that Harvard longitudinal study of adults and how quality relationships are so important to well-being. And we talk about that on the podcast all the time. So could you just say a few words about how your book and how the skills in your book can relate to just general well-being for people?
Yeah, well, I think communication is Homo sapiens' superpower, right? Communication is the thing that has caused our species to succeed so well. And it allows us to build villages and towns and cities and families and, to invent fire and aircraft carriers and video games. Communication is at the core of everything. And so our brains have evolved to not only be really good at communication, but to crave communication. The Surgeon General has said that being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And what's really happening there is that when you're lonely, when you're not interacting with other people, when you don't have any close relationships, there's whole parts of your brain that you're not using. And more importantly, there's all these reward sensations that you have no access to that only come into your life when we spend time with other people. Equally, many of the things that just give us pleasure, even apart from our neurology, involve other people. There's that feeling of wholeness and goodness you get after a really good conversation. So you mentioned the Harvard study for adult development. What they found is that there's only one reliable predictor of whether people will be happy and healthy and successful, however you define success, at age 65. And that's having at least a handful of close relationships at age 45. Because if you have a handful of close relationships at 45, you've probably had them for a while. You're probably going to continue to have them. And that does not mean that you're talking to these people every single day or every single month. It might mean that you have a close friend that you talk to once a year, twice a year. But you set aside an hour to talk to that person once a year. And you feel close to each other. You feel like you understand each other's lives. You're involved in each other's lives. That is the thing that actually guarantees whether we will be happy, healthy, and successful as we get older. And nothing else really does.
Well, and I think that this really does give people some incentive to work on these skills, which can be hard. And as a therapist, I see that people sometimes feel like they're not always great at this or they struggle in some way. And it matters. It is important. It's easier to sit on your couch and turn on the TV or something like that than it is to go out and work on this in the community and with your people in your life. But it really is important for your overall life satisfaction long term.
So I disagree a little bit with what you just said, because oftentimes what we know from research is that people assume it will be easier to sit on the couch and watch TV than to go out and meet someone. But then if you ask them afterwards, are you glad you came out and met that person? They would say, yeah, I'm really glad.
Yeah.
Like that was like, it's really, really nice just to do this. We tend to do a bad job at anticipating how much we will enjoy social versus non-social experiences. And so as a result, there's sometimes a bias towards non-social experiences or non-intimacy. Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago has done a lot of research on this about how sometimes we do a very poor job of forecasting what will make us happy, particularly when it comes to socializing with other people. But the answer is that basically, like every time we socialize with other people, we're happy that we did it. But many of the times when we stay home and just watch TV, we're, kind of disappointed that we did it. And so if we can do a better job of anticipating what will bring us pleasure and what won't, then we tend to be more social.
Yeah. I can really relate to that. Almost every time I have social plans, I spend a little bit of time beforehand thinking, why am I doing this? All I want is time to myself. And then I go and I'm so glad I went every time. So in terms of some of the skills, what I want to do is start with the example you used with you and your wife, where I see this a lot with people where they want that deeper connection with maybe their partner, or it could be someone else, like a close friend or family member. But often it's in a marriage or partner relationship where they are coming at it from different places, or they're just not quite hitting the mark. So what are some skills that partners can use? Like it sounds like you did, to get into that deeper, more connected place.
Well, give me an example. Like what's an example?
So I think an example, and I mean, I think you started to get into this earlier, is that where one person wants to like win an argument or make a point or fix a problem or something like that. And the other one wants to like share, or one person wants to like vent and the other person is tired of the venting. Like the venting is really draining them, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like the matching principle isn't quite happening.
So I think in situations like that, you have to decide that you want to match each other. There's no like jujitsu. Like you can't come in and be like, oh, I'm going to use my mind control to get you to stop complaining or to care about what I'm saying. Like you have to say like, look, I'd like this to be a productive conversation. And so, the first thing I want to ask is, do you want me to help you with this, or do you want me just to listen? Like, what can I do to make this conversation better for you? In schools, they teach teachers that when a student comes up and they have something important they want to talk to about, the teacher should ask them, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard? Mm-hmm. Right? Which are the three kinds of conversations: the practical, the emotional, and the social. And the reason why that's really powerful is because kids usually can tell you right away what they want. They know that like, no, I don't need your help. I just need you to give me a hug because I feel bad. Or no, I don't need your help, but I need you to know what Jimmy's doing to me because it's really unfair. We know how to tell people what we want. And the key is to ask them. And so that's the first thing that I think a couple can do, is they can both sit down and say like, look, here's my goal for this conversation.
Yeah, like talk at a higher level about here's what's happening between us. Let's get on the same page with.
Yeah. Sometimes within like psychology, they refer to that as a meta conversation. We're having a conversation about the conversation. But it doesn't have to be very long or very awkward. It can just be like someone comes home and they're complaining, just say like, look, like just, I want to help you out. Like, what's your goal in telling me about this? And oftentimes they're going to be able to tell you, and then you're aligned. As long as you want to be aligned. That does not mean that like, if one person wants to share and the other person really wants to win, then the problem isn't how they're communicating with each other. The problem is the motivations that they're bringing into this relationship.
And maybe they can talk about that, and that can help them come to a better place with it, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
They might have to address that difference.
Yeah, if somebody said like, look, when you bring this up, I get really defensive and I have this instinct to like try and win and beat you and prove that you're wrong. Let's talk about like why I feel that. That's an emotional conversation, right? Now we're not talking about like who's right and who's wrong. We're talking about the emotions that are pushing us into conflict.
Yeah. Personal question alert. Do you feel like you and your wife, having learned about this and written your book, that you are better at doing this now at this point?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. I think that we have a pretty good communication.
Okay, here's another one. So actually this goes back to a social situation where you don't really know people and you want to connect with them. And you have some really wonderful ideas for this, where you're trying to bust through small talk about the weather and get to feel more sense of connection with people. What are some of those types of questions or skills that you can use to get beyond small talk?
One of the most important things that we can do in a conversation is we can ask questions, right? And in particular, not all questions are created equal. Some questions are known as deep questions. And a deep question is something that asks me about my values or my beliefs or my experiences. And that can sound a little bit intimidating, but it's as simple as like if you meet someone who's a doctor, instead of saying like, oh, what hospital do you work at? Saying, oh, what made you decide to go to medical school? That's really interesting. When we ask that second question, what made you decide to go to medical school? What we're really asking is, tell me how you see the world. Tell me what your values are. Tell me about your experiences. Tell me what your beliefs are. And when someone shares something with us, two things happen. Number one, they tend to tell us what kind of mindset they're in, so we know what kind of conversation they want to have. They might say something like, oh, I became a doctor because I always wanted a steady job. Okay, so that person's in a practical mindset right now. But the same person in another setting might say, oh, I became a doctor because I saw my dad get sick. And I wanted to be one of those healers. I wanted to help him. And that's more of a social or emotional conversation. So that's the first thing that a deep question does, is it lets us figure out what kind of mindset the other person is in. But then, and this is just as important, a deep question allows them to say something authentic. And I'm going to use this word vulnerability. And vulnerability is kind of misunderstood as to what it is. Within psychology, vulnerability has a very specific definition. Vulnerability is something I feel when I say something that you could judge. Now, I might not care about your judgment. I might tell you that I like Star Trek better than Star Wars, and you think that I'm totally wrong, and I don't care, right? It doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, by the way, you are wrong. No, I'm just kidding.
But by virtue of the fact that I've said something that you can judge, I experience vulnerability. And what we know is if the other person responds without judgment, but with a display of vulnerability of their own, then we feel closer to each other. So the thing that happens is that when I ask you a deep question and you respond with something authentic and you feel vulnerable, if I answer my own question by, oh, you became a doctor because your dad gets sick. That's funny. I'm a lawyer and I became a lawyer because I saw my uncle get arrested. Now suddenly we feel closer to each other. We feel what's known as neural entrainment. And as a result, we will start having a more meaningful conversation.
Yeah, it feels like you test the waters a little bit. If I open up a little, will they open up? If I ask a question, will they share? And there's kind of that back and forth. And both people are testing it out a little bit. I actually think that idea of these deeper questions, for me personally, is one of the things I'm really going to take with me from your book, because that alone is a really good skill. Just thinking about, am I asking questions that are going to foster that? And it's that little tweak sometimes that can really lead to a deeper conversation much more quickly.
Yeah. And the way to think about it is that rather than asking people about the facts of their life, ask them how they feel about their life, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than saying like, oh, what year did you buy your house up in the Heights? Saying, oh, why'd you decide to move to the Heights? What was it about it that you like? Right? Instead of asking about a fact, I'm asking how you feel about something. And in doing so, I'm inviting you to explain to me how you see what's important to you, how you see the world.
Open-ended questions in therapist speak, we talk about that. That's something we get trained on kind of early on, instead of yes, no, or just, those one-word answers. It's like trying to pull something more out of the conversation. Yeah. So I was really fascinated between the difference between happy and unhappy couples in regard to control. And I think this is a big one. So what recommendations can you make for couples that fight a lot when there's just this control pattern and they're getting entrenched in this unsatisfying place?
Yeah. So one of the things that we know is that all couples fight with each other. And not necessarily the same amount, but literally there are no relationships where people don't squabble with each other, at least a little bit. And the question that researchers started asking in the 1970s was, it seems like some couples fight with each other and there's just no consequence. They're like, they have a fight, it blows over, they go on with their day, neither is angry at the other, neither is thinking about divorce. It happens and then it evaporates like clouds. And then there's other people who fight and those fights become perpetual. Those fights become the defining characteristic of the relationship. If you ask them why they got divorced, they say oftentimes because we fought all the time. And whenever they weren't fighting, it was almost like a lull between battles as opposed to the real relationship itself. And so the researchers wanted to figure out what's the difference here? What accounts for good couples versus bad couples when it comes to fighting? And they looked at a bunch of things. And the thing that they discovered was actually the biggest distinguishing characteristic was this issue of control. That when we are in a conflict, when we're fighting with someone, when we feel upset, all of us, all humans have an instinct to control things, to control whatever we can. It makes us feel like we're in control. It gives us agency. It makes us feel better and less scared. It's that fight or flight instinct. And the easiest thing to control oftentimes is the person sitting across from you. So I try and control you. I'll say things like, you shouldn't feel that way. That's a dumb way to feel. I think you're making too big a thing of this. I'm trying to control your emotions. Or you always say that, and I'm not going to respond when you say things like that. I'm trying to control what you're allowed to say. Or I'm not going to talk about this topic with you because you're irrational. I'm trying to control you. And whenever we feel like we're being controlled, we react negatively to it. So the question becomes, what do we do with this instinct to control? We're going to feel it regardless. We can't extinguish it. And what good couples do, what happy couples do, is they tend to find things that they can control together. Instead of trying to control each other, they tend to find things that they can control together. So for instance, they might control the timing of this conversation. Say something like, rather than discuss this right now at 11 o'clock at night when we're both tired, let's wait until we wake up tomorrow morning and we can talk about it then. Or they might try and control the boundaries of the argument. The number one predictor of divorce is a pattern known as kitchen sinking, which is that when we start fighting about one thing, we inevitably start fighting about everything, right? We start by talking about we're fighting about where to go for Thanksgiving. And then suddenly it becomes your mother hates me and you don't earn enough money. And that is toxic for a relationship. And so good couples will do things say, look, let's just talk about Thanksgiving. We can talk about mother some other time, money some other time, but let's focus on Thanksgiving and figure out. Now we're controlling that conversation together. And when we find things to control together, what it does is it creates a sense of teamwork, that we're in this together. And that's really, really important to developing that fight in a way that's healthy.
Yeah, that's super helpful, I think, because people often are probably doing those things without realizing it. And so that's a shift that people can make if they are more aware of it. Okay, one more type of conversation I wanted to check in is a negotiation, right? So we think of the business deal, I want more money, I want a promotion, but there's so many small negotiations and sometimes we're not even realizing it. And I was thinking about in my family, it's where should we go to dinner or how much TV the kids should watch? I'm fighting with the kids about that, but I'm not thinking of it as a negotiation. How can people, when they're trying to work out a difference like that, what skills can people use to do better in that kind of conversation?
So within the research literature, these are referred to as quiet negotiations, because you're right. A business negotiation, my goal is oftentimes to win, right? To beat you. But in a quiet negotiation, which happens many, many times every single day, the goal is not to win. The goal is to understand. I'm going to ask you, where should we go to dinner? And you have an idea and you have an idea. And it's not I want to browbeat you into agreeing with me that we should go get Chinese food. It's like, I want to find a solution that actually like works for everyone, that makes us all happy. And so like, my goal is not to beat you. My goal is to understand what you're trying to say. And oftentimes when we have these things that feel like negotiations with our kids or our partners, if we just take a step back and reorient what our goal is, then oftentimes it gets a lot better. The goal of a conversation is not to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, or that I'm smart and you're not, or that you should like me, or that you should do what I say. The goal of every conversation is simply to understand what the other person is saying, to understand how they see the world, and to speak in such a way that they can understand you. And if you walk away from a conversation disagreeing with each other, but you both understand each other, then that conversation is a success, right? You've done something important. And you're probably going to find places where you do agree with each other. So I think the way to think about these negotiations that we have is set the goal of not trying to convince the other person, not even necessarily trying to come immediately to an answer, but rather to understand what the other person really wants, or what they need, or what they're saying. And once you understand it, the answers usually become very, very obvious.
Yeah, like that idea that you're going to, first of all, have that shared kind of like listening to the other person and reframing the conversation on what are we doing here? And that just automatically takes it to a more collaborative place and less of a headbutting over the details, squabbling. Yeah. Well, I know that your time is limited today, but I will just tell our listeners that there are so many more wonderful strategies in your book. I wish we had more time to get to all of them today. And I love the way that you frame them as like types of conversations that we all probably have all the time, but again, might not be thinking explicitly about it. So I really encourage people to pick up Supercommunicators. If any of this sounded familiar, which is probably most people. And Charles, how can people find you online?
I have a website, charlesduhigg.com. It's Duhigg. Or if you search for Supercommunicators in Google, or The Power of Habit, my first book, I'll probably come up. I have a newsletter that I send out every couple of weeks, looking at the latest research called The Science of Better. And I would love to hear from people.
Great. Yeah, you're very easy to find online. So I see your work all over the place, your articles. I love it. And I love, the Power of Habit is also a terrific book. And so it was a real pleasure having the chance to talk with you today.
It's nice to talk with you
so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.